The city's deadliest man froze when a tiny voice whispered, "My mommy's sorry she's late." His guards reached for guns, his enemies closed in, and the Mafia boss realized someone had delivered his greatest weakness in pink shoes. Who sends a child to a monster? And what happens when the monster cares? Well, we are about to find out. Hit the subscribe button and like this video so you don't miss out. Now let's dive in. Elliot Cobb did not wait for anyone. Not business associates. Not rivals. Not even friends, if he still had any. Men had lost fingers for wasting his time. But tonight, he waited. Not for a deal, not for blood, but for something he couldn't quite name. His lieutenant, Vince, had called it a date. Elliot had called it nonsense. "Your mommy sent you in here alone?" The girl nodded, her curls bouncing. "She said you'd be sitting by the window with the candle. And you are." A laugh escaped him before he could stop it. Not a cruel laugh, not even mocking. Something lighter, rusted with disuse. "And what's your name, little messenger?" "Lydia," she said proudly. He leaned back in his chair. "You're brave, Lydia." "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she replied seriously. "But Mommy said you're her friend. So it's okay." Her honesty landed sharper than any insult he'd ever received. Friend. The word settled somewhere behind his ribs, in a place that had forgotten warmth. He cleared his throat. "Your mommy sounds smart." "She is," Lydia said. "She's a nurse. She helps people when they get hurt." Before Elliot could reply, the cafe door swung open again. A woman hurried in, her coat half buttoned, hair damp from the rain. Her eyes scanned the room until she saw them. Her daughter standing in front of the man everyone else was too afraid to look at. "Lydia," she gasped, rushing forward. "I told you to wait by the door." The girl turned, unbothered. "I found him, Mommy. I told him you were sorry." Elliot stood as the woman approached. She was younger than he expected. Late 20s, maybe. Beautiful in a way that didn't try to be. The kind of beauty that came from sleepless nights and stubborn hope. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, breathless and embarrassed. "The parking meter wouldn't take my card, and then she doesn't always listen." "It's fine," Elliot said, his voice softer than he intended. "She delivered your message perfectly." The woman let out a nervous laugh. "She's good at that. I'm Maya. Maya Benjamin. And this little escape artist is Lydia." He nodded once. "Elliot Cobb." Maya blinked at the name as if it tickled something faintly familiar. But she only smiled. "Nice to finally meet you. I hope this isn't the worst first impression you've ever had." "Not even close," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat, pulling Lydia gently beside her. The girl swung her legs under the table, humming to herself while Maya tried to regain her composure. Elliot studied her quietly. There was something in the way she held herself, tired but unbroken, like someone who'd been fighting life for too long and still hadn't learned how to surrender. "I really am sorry," she said again. "The babysitter canceled last minute. I didn't want to reschedule after you'd already made time." "Don't worry about it," he replied. "You showed up. That's more than most people do." Their eyes met for the first time. Something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of curiosity, maybe recognition. Maya looked away first, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. Lydia leaned forward. "Do you like pancakes, Mr. Elliot? Mommy makes them on Saturdays, but she burns them sometimes." Elliot smirked. "I like pancakes. Burned or not." Maya groaned. "Lydia, sweetie." "It's okay," Elliot said. "She's honest. That's rare." Maya exhaled, half laughing. "You'd think that's a good thing until she announces it to strangers." Elliot's smile lingered. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like this, without fear, without calculation. The cafe felt smaller suddenly, quieter, as if the entire city had paused outside to listen. For a man who'd spent years surrounded by shadows, the warmth of this moment was unsettling. He sat back, studying them both. The nurse with kind eyes who didn't know she was sitting across from a man who decided wars with a nod, and the child who looked at him as if he were just another grown-up at a table. "Lydia," she said proudly. He leaned back in his chair. "You're brave, Lydia." "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," she replied seriously. "But Mommy said you're her friend. So it's okay." Her honesty landed sharper than any insult he'd ever received. Friend. The word settled somewhere behind his ribs, in a place that had forgotten warmth. He cleared his throat. "Your mommy sounds smart." "She is," Lydia said. "She's a nurse. She helps people when they get hurt." Before Elliot could reply, the cafe door swung open again. A woman hurried in, her coat half-buttoned, hair damp from the rain. Her eyes scanned the room until she saw them. Her daughter standing in front of the man everyone else was too afraid to look at. "Lydia," she gasped, rushing forward. "I told you to wait by the door." The girl turned, unbothered. "I found him, Mommy. I told him you were sorry." Elliot stood as the woman approached. She was younger than he expected. Late 20s, maybe. Beautiful in a way that didn't try to be. The kind of beauty that came from sleepless nights and stubborn hope. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, breathless and embarrassed. "The parking meter wouldn't take my card, and then she doesn't always listen." "It's fine," Elliot said, his voice softer than he intended. "She delivered your message perfectly." The woman let out a nervous laugh. "She's good at that. I'm Maya. Maya Benjamin. And this little escape artist is Lydia." He nodded once. "Elliot Cobb." Maya blinked at the name as if it tickled something faintly familiar. But she only smiled. "Nice to finally meet you. I hope this isn't the worst first impression you've ever had." "Not even close," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat, pulling Lydia gently beside her. The girl swung her legs under the table, humming to herself while Maya tried to regain her composure. Elliot studied her quietly. There was something in the way she held herself, tired but unbroken, like someone who'd been fighting life for too long and still hadn't learned how to surrender. "I really am sorry," she said again. "The babysitter canceled last minute. I didn't want to reschedule after you'd already made time." "Don't worry about it," he replied. "You showed up. That's more than most people do." Their eyes met for the first time. Something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of curiosity, maybe recognition. Maya looked away first, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. Lydia leaned forward. "Do you like pancakes, Mr. Elliot? Mommy makes them on Saturdays, but she burns them sometimes." Elliot smirked. "I like pancakes. Burned or not." Maya groaned. "Lydia, sweetie." "It's okay," Elliot said. "She's honest. That's rare." Maya exhaled, half laughing. "You'd think that's a good thing until she announces it to strangers." Elliot's smile lingered. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to him like this, without fear, without calculation. The cafe felt smaller suddenly, quieter, as if the entire city had paused outside to listen. For a man who'd spent years surrounded by shadows, the warmth of this moment was unsettling. He sat back, studying them both. The nurse with kind eyes who didn't know she was sitting across from a man who decided wars with a nod, and the child who looked at him as if he were just another grown-up at a table. The silence stretched, gentle but charged. He realized his hand had relaxed around his cup. Maya noticed, her tone softening. "You don't have to pretend to enjoy this, Mr. Cobb. Blind dates aren't exactly my comfort zone either." "I'm not pretending," he said quietly. "This is different." She tilted her head, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Elliot glanced down at Lydia, who was now coloring on the napkin with a crayon she'd found in her pocket. She looked peaceful, untouched by the darkness he carried like a shadow. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the monster everyone whispered about. Outside, the rain had slowed. Inside, the lights glowed softer, the air warmer. And in that simple, strange moment, a feared mafia boss, a tired nurse, and a fearless little girl, the world shifted ever so slightly. Elliot didn't know it yet, but the night had already begun to change him. He leaned forward, his voice low almost to himself. You're late, Maya Benjamin. Maya met his gaze, a small smile tugging at her lips. You waited. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he was glad he had. Because sometimes, even in a world built on shadows, light walks in wearing pink and carrying a message that says, "Please don't leave yet." The hum of conversation slowly returned to the cafe, though something in the air had shifted. It wasn't fear, at least not the kind that usually followed Elliot Cobb wherever he went. It was something lighter, quieter. For once, people were looking at him not because of who he was, but because of what they were witnessing. A man like him smiling. Maya Benjamin still looked flustered, her cheeks flushed from rushing through the rain. She tucked a curl behind her ear and gave him an apologetic smile. I really didn't plan for it to start like this, she said. The babysitter canceled last minute, and I couldn't find anyone else. I didn't want to cancel on you too. I thought maybe, just this once, things could go smoothly. Elliot leaned back in his chair, the faintest grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Smooth is overrated. That earned a small laugh from her. Soft, hesitant, but genuine. You say that because you don't have a 4-year-old running your life. He raised an eyebrow. You're a nurse, you said? She nodded. Night shifts mostly. I work at St. Vincent's pediatric ward. It's not glamorous, but I like it. It reminds me that even when the world feels like a mess, there are still good things worth fighting for. She shrugged lightly, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. Sorry, that probably sounds corny. Not at all, Elliot said quietly. It sounds honest. She glanced up at him, surprised. People didn't usually call her honest. They called her tired. Or practical. Or strong. Honest felt like a word from another life. Lydia broke the pause by humming to herself, swinging her legs beneath the table. Mommy says coffee makes her grumpy, she announced suddenly. Maya groaned softly. Lydia. Elliot smirked. That's so. She says it tastes like burnt rain, Lydia continued proudly. But she drinks it anyway. Grown-ups are weird. Elliot laughed, an unguarded, almost disbelieving sound. His guards at the far end of the room turned their heads toward him instinctively. They hadn't heard that laugh in years. Some of them exchanged a look that said everything. Who is this version of him? Maya covered her face, embarrassed. She just says whatever comes to mind. I swear she doesn't mean. It's fine, Elliot interrupted, still smiling. She's honest too. Lydia grinned as if she'd won an argument. See, Mommy. He gets it. Wonderful, Maya muttered, shaking her head. Now she thinks she's got backup. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. How long have you been doing this? The hospital, I mean. 6 years. Since Lydia was born. She smiled faintly, looking at her daughter. It's not an easy job, but it's real. Every shift feels like you're doing something that matters. She paused, eyes drifting back to him. What about you? What do you do? Elliot's hand froze halfway to his cup. For a moment, the warmth of the scene flickered, replaced by the ghost of what he couldn't say. What do I do? I decide who lives and who disappears. He set the cup down carefully. Business, he said finally. Management mostly. Management, Maya repeated with a teasing tone. That sounds suspiciously vague. It's complicated. I'll bet. Her eyes sparkled just slightly. Let me guess. You're one of those men who doesn't like to talk about work because it's classified. Something like that. She tilted her head, studying him. You look like a man who hasn't taken a vacation in years. He chuckled under his breath. You'd be right about that. And I'm guessing you also don't sleep much. Coffee at 9:30? That's a dead giveaway. Elliot raised an eyebrow, impressed. You read people often? It comes with the job. Sick kids tell you more than they think they do. You start noticing things about adults too. He met her gaze, something unspoken flickering there. And what do you notice about me? Maya hesitated. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. That you're used to being in control, she said softly. But you don't look happy about it. The words struck like a quiet blade. No one had ever said that to him. Not his crew, not his enemies, not even himself. He didn't reply, just held her gaze long enough for her to know she was right. Lydia broke the silence again, tugging on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can we get pancakes after this? You promised." Elliot smiled faintly. "Pancakes at this hour?" "She makes them all the time," Lydia said proudly. "Even at night. But she burns them sometimes." Maya groaned again. "She's going to tell you everything." Elliot laughed quietly. "Sounds like my kind of midnight snack." Lydia beamed. "You can come too. But you have to bring syrup." He looked at her for a long moment, as though memorizing that kind of innocence, and nodded solemnly. "Deal." Outside, through the rain-speckled glass, a black car rolled slowly past the cafe. The driver didn't stop, didn't even look in, but one of Elliot's men did. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that wordless glance, a message passed. "You're being watched." Elliot's hand twitched slightly, but he didn't move. He didn't want to ruin this moment with violence, not yet. For tonight, he would let the world pretend he was someone else. Maya noticed his stillness, the way his expression darkened for just a second. Something wrong. He blinked, the cold edge fading. "Nothing," he said smoothly. "Just thinking." She smiled gently. "You do that a lot, don't you? Thinking. Keeping things to yourself." He didn't answer, and she didn't press. Lydia was now absorbed in drawing circles on a napkin with a pink crayon she'd fished out of her coat pocket. Elliot watched her for a moment longer, then turned back to Maya. "Tell me something," he said. "What made you say yes to this? To meeting me?" She laughed lightly. "Honestly. Curiosity. My sister said you were a friend of her husband's. I figured you couldn't be too terrible if he vouched for you." He hid a smirk. Her sister's husband worked for him, but she didn't know that. And now. Maya glanced at her daughter, then back at him. "Now I'm thinking you're not what I expected. That's good or bad?" "I'll tell you when the night's over." Elliot nodded slowly, accepting that. There was something refreshing about the way she didn't bend to him, didn't shrink from his gaze. He was used to people choosing their words like walking through a minefield. Maya spoke like there was no danger at all. The rain outside had thinned to a mist. Inside, the cafe had emptied a little. The candles flickered low, casting gold halos over the table. Lydia yawned and rested her head on her mother's arm. "It's getting late," Maya said softly. "I should get her home." Elliot glanced at the clock, then back at them. "I'll walk you to your car." "Oh, that's not necessary," she said quickly. He stood anyway, sliding his coat on. It wasn't a suggestion. Something in his tone, gentle but absolute, made her pause. She nodded, gathering her things, careful not to wake her sleepy daughter. When they stepped outside, the air smelled like wet pavement and night-blooming jasmine. The car was parked a short distance down the street. Elliot walked beside them, his stride unhurried. Maya kept glancing at him from the corner of her eye. There was something about his presence, calm but edged with quiet power, that made her both uneasy and strangely safe. Lydia clung to her mother's hand, half asleep. "Mommy," she mumbled. "Can Mr. Elliot come for pancakes tomorrow?" Maya smiled faintly. "We'll see, baby." Elliot's expression softened. "I might take you up on that." At the car, Maya opened the door and buckled Lydia in. When she turned back, Elliot was standing a step behind her, hands in his pockets, watching the street. His eyes were darker now, more guarded. "Thank you," she said, "for walking us." He nodded once. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," she said quietly. "Not many people bother." For a moment neither spoke. Rain dripped softly from the awning above them, the world holding its breath. Then Maya smiled, small but real. "You're not as scary as you look, you know." Elliot's brow lifted slightly. "Give it time." She laughed, shaking her head. "Good night, Mr. Cobb." "Good night, Maya Benjamin." He watched as she drove away, the red taillights fading into the wet city. When they disappeared around the corner, he exhaled slowly and turned back toward the cafe. Vince was waiting by the door, arms crossed. "What?" Elliot said. His lieutenant smirked. "You." Laughing. "Walking people to cars. What's next, boss?" "Sunday school." Elliot gave him a cold look, but there was no real anger in it. "Don't start." "I'm just saying," Vince said, raising his hands. "You've been in this business a long time. Never seen you act like that before." Elliot didn't respond. He looked down the street where Maya's car had gone, the ghost of a smile still haunting his face. "Maybe I just needed a reminder." "Of what?" "That there's still something worth protecting." He turned, walking toward the waiting car. The night swallowed his figure as the city lights shimmered across the wet asphalt. For the first time in years, Elliot Cobb didn't feel like a man returning to war. He felt like someone who had just stepped into unfamiliar peace, and didn't quite know what to do with it. Maybe it would vanish tomorrow. Maybe the world would come knocking again with its debts and its blood. But tonight, he'd let himself remember what it felt like to be human. And somewhere, deep down, something fragile and dangerous began to stir. A feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hope. So if you're listening, and you've ever met someone who made you stop and question who you've become, maybe even who you could still be, don't look away. Some people appear in our lives like quiet interruptions but change everything without meaning to. Subscribe if you've ever met someone who made you reconsider everything. The next morning came with the kind of silence that only follows storms. Elliot Cobb sat in his office at the top of the Varden building, a fortress of glass and steel that he owned but rarely looked out from. The city stretched below him, indifferent and gray. On his desk, untouched coffee steamed beside a newspaper splashed with headlines about a recent gang bust. Not his crew. Never his crew. Across from him, Vince, his underboss, lounged in a chair with that half-smirk he always wore when he thought he was being clever. "So," Vince began, swirling his espresso, "how was dinner with your new friends?" Elliot didn't look up. "What friends?" "The nurse. The kid. The one who made you laugh." Vince chuckled. "You think we didn't notice, boss? Half the crew's still trying to figure out if you were drugged or just losing it." A muscle twitched in Elliot's jaw. Normally, that look would have been enough to make Vince's throat tighten. But today, something in it was off. It wasn't fury. It was restraint. Maybe even guilt. "I don't pay you to notice my personal life," Elliot said quietly. "No, you pay me to notice everything," Vince countered. "And what I noticed is, you were smiling last night. That's bad for business." Elliot finally looked up, eyes like flint. "You done?" Vince raised his hands in mock surrender. Sure. Just saying, soft things make sharp men dull." The words hung in the air. In another lifetime, Elliot would have snapped. He would have reached across the desk and reminded Vince who built this empire out of nothing but blood, loyalty, and fear. But instead, Elliot said nothing. He just stared at the grain of his desk until Vince got the message and stood to leave. When the door shut, Elliot exhaled. The sound filled the office like a confession. Soft things make sharp men dull. Maybe Vince was right. But last night, for the first time in years, Elliot hadn't felt dull. He'd felt alive. He poured himself another coffee, but the bitterness hit different now. A small crayon drawing lay near the edge of his desk, Lydia's, folded neatly and left behind in the chaos of their exit. He opened it again. It showed 3 figures, a tall man with dark hair, a woman in a pink dress, and a little girl holding both their hands. Above them, in bold purple letters, she'd written, "Mr. Elliot's coffee time." A smile ghosted across his lips before he caught himself. He set the paper down, staring at it for a long time, then picked up his phone. "Get me her number," he told his assistant. "Maya Benjamin. St. Vincent's Hospital." It was supposed to be a simple call, a polite excuse to return what wasn't his. But even as the phone rang, Elliot knew it wasn't about the drawing. "Hello." Her voice was soft, distracted. He could hear noise in the background. Children laughing, faint beeping from monitors. "Ms. Benjamin," he said. "Yes." "Who's this?" It's Elliot. From last night. A pause. Then, "Oh, Mr. Cobb. Hi. Did something happen?" "No," he said quickly. "Just, your daughter left something behind." There was warmth in her laugh. "That sounds like Lydia. What was it?" "A drawing." "Oh." She smiled into the phone. He could hear it. "She'll be thrilled you found it. She worked hard on that." "I could drop it off," he offered before he could stop himself. There was another pause. Hesitation, curiosity, something in between. "You really don't have to." "I insist," he interrupted. "It's on my way." She didn't argue again. "All right. I finish my shift at 3. We'll be home after that." By the time he arrived at her apartment building, the afternoon light was bleeding gold through the smog. It was a modest neighborhood, quiet, ordinary, the kind of place where people actually said good morning to each other. The kind of place he'd only ever passed through on his way to somewhere darker. He climbed the narrow stairwell, the smell of detergent and old wood thick in the air, until he reached a door with a paper sign taped to it. "Please remove shoes. Baby naps at odd hours." He smiled faintly. It was so unlike his world of bulletproof doors and motion sensors that it felt surreal. When he knocked, the door cracked open and Lydia peeked out, her curls a little messier than yesterday. "Mr. Elliot!" she exclaimed, eyes wide. "You found it." He crouched to her level, holding out the folded paper. "I did. You're quite the artist." She giggled and grabbed it, waving him inside. "Mommy's making tea. You can stay." "Lydia, don't invite people in like that," Maya called from the small kitchen, voice half reprimand, half amusement. She appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on a dish towel, hair pulled into a loose bun. Her scrubs had been replaced by an oversized sweater and jeans. He felt something strange stir in his chest at the sight. This was who she really was, not the hurried, flustered woman from last night, but something grounded, radiant, real. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, stepping inside. "Not at all," she replied, smiling. "Though I have to warn you, we don't exactly serve cappuccinos here. Just tea and whatever snacks Lydia hasn't demolished yet." "I'll take my chances." The apartment was small but warm. Plants on the windowsill, children's drawings taped to the fridge, a faint lavender scent hanging in the air. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. Lydia had already spread out her crayons on the living room floor, working on a new masterpiece. Maya poured tea into mismatched mugs. "Milk. Sugar. Black's fine." She handed him a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. Neither mentioned it, but the moment lingered. "So," she said, sitting across from him, "do you often hand-deliver lost art, or should I feel special?" Elliot smirked. "You should probably feel special." Maya laughed, shaking her head. "I'll take it." They sat in easy quiet for a while, the kind that didn't demand words. Lydia hummed as she drew, occasionally glancing up at them. Every now and then, Elliot's eyes drifted toward her, a small, bright presence that didn't seem to belong in his shadowed world. "You don't talk much," Maya said finally. "I talk when I have something to say." "Ah," she teased. "One of those." He arched an eyebrow. "Those? The mysterious types. Always calm, always composed. Let me guess, you hate small talk." "Despise it," he admitted. "Then what do you like talking about?" Elliot thought for a moment, then said, "People who surprise me." That made her smile. "So I'm guessing Lydia qualifies?" "More than anyone I've met in a long time." Across the room, the little girl was carefully shading a cup of coffee brown. She looked up suddenly and asked, "Mr. Elliot, do you have a family?" The question hit harder than she could possibly understand. Elliot froze, the teacup halfway to his lips. Maya started to intervene. "Lydia, that's not polite," but he raised a hand slightly, stopping her. "It's all right," he said softly. He set the cup down, his gaze on the child. "No, not anymore." Lydia blinked, uncomprehending. "Did they move away?" Elliot's throat tightened. "Something like that." She frowned thoughtfully, then said, "That's okay. You can share ours if you want. Mommy makes good pancakes, even if they're burnt. Maya groaned. Lydia. Elliot chuckled quietly. I might take you up on that. The little girl nodded solemnly, satisfied. Then she returned to her drawing, humming again. Maya's eyes softened. She's never said that to anyone before. He smiled faintly. She's got good instincts. They fell into comfortable silence again, sipping tea as the afternoon light slanted through the blinds. For a brief, impossible moment, Elliot let himself imagine this life. The warmth, the laughter, the peace. A table not covered in guns or ledgers, but crayons and teacups. Later, when he returned to his penthouse, the world outside had gone cold again. The air smelled like rain and metal. His guards nodded as he passed, their eyes avoiding his. The familiar hum of the city filled the silence, the low growl of engines, distant sirens, the pulse of power that never stopped beating. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Instead, he sat on the edge of his desk and unfolded Lydia's new drawing. It was him again, Mr. Elliot, sitting at a table, smiling. He traced the crude lines with his thumb, the faint curve of a grin she must have imagined because she'd never really seen it. Not like that. And yet, for the first time, he wanted to. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as the city lights flickered through the glass. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. All the ghosts of his past, the ones he buried under money and fear, rose to meet him. He remembered every betrayal that had built his empire. Every man he'd trusted who turned on him. Every night he'd promised himself never to feel anything again. Because feelings made you weak. But tonight, sitting in the dark, holding a child's drawing, Elliot Cobb felt the faintest crack in the stone around his heart. And once something cracks, it doesn't stop. He folded the paper carefully, setting it on his nightstand like something sacred. For the first time in years, he didn't fall asleep to the sound of violence in his head. He fell asleep to silence, and the memory of a little girl's voice saying, "You can share ours if you want." Maybe he couldn't erase who he'd been. But maybe, just maybe, there was still time to become someone else. So if you're still listening, and there's someone out there who believes in a better version of you, don't let that belief die. People like that don't come twice. Subscribe if you believe everyone deserves one chance to change. The whispers began like smoke, thin, drifting, harmless at first. But Elliot Cobb knew better than anyone that smoke always meant something was burning. It started with one of his lieutenants mentioning a rumor. The boss has gone soft. He's seeing a nurse with a kid. Then came the jokes, the sideways glances, the sudden, uneasy silences whenever he walked into a room. Within a week, the story had spread across the underworld like wildfire. The once untouchable king of the city's shadows had a weakness, and her name was Maya Benjamin. Elliot stood in the middle of his office, staring out at the skyline while Vince reported from the corner, voice low. "They're talking, boss. The Vargas crew. Even the Albanians. They think you've lost your edge." Elliot didn't turn. Let them think it. They also think the nurse might be leverage. That made him turn. Slowly. His eyes, cold and precise, cut through the smoke between them. Then make sure they learn otherwise. Vince hesitated. "You want me to send a message?" Elliot's voice dropped, dark and final. "Tell every crew in this city, if anyone even looks in her direction, they disappear. No warnings. No mercy." Vince nodded, swallowing hard. Understood. When he was gone, the silence that followed felt heavier than any war meeting. Elliot's hand tightened around the glass he held until it cracked. He didn't even flinch. The blood that trickled down his palm was nothing compared to the fear rising in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Because fear meant attachment, and attachment meant weakness. But it was already too late. Across town, Maya was folding laundry in her small apartment, sunlight warming the room. Lydia sat on the couch, legs swinging, humming a song from daycare. "Mommy," she said suddenly, "Mr. Elliot said he doesn't like pancakes with syrup. Can we make him chocolate ones next time?" Maya smiled faintly. "We'll see, sweetheart." She'd been thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. The mysterious man with the deep voice, the haunted eyes, and the strange gentleness that didn't match his scars. He'd been around for a few weeks now, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to drop off something for Lydia. But every visit left her with more questions. She'd noticed the way he always chose the seat facing the door, the way he scanned the street before walking her to her car, the faint marks on his knuckles, the old bullet graze near his collarbone that he never spoke about. And then there was his phone, always close, always locked. She told herself not to ask, not to pry. But curiosity gnawed at her. What kind of man carried that kind of darkness in his eyes and still made her daughter laugh like that? That evening, Elliot showed up at their door with a small box of pastries. He looked tired more than usual, as if the world had been pushing against him all day. "Lydia around?" he asked. "She's in her room, drawing," Maya said, stepping aside to let him in. "You look like you've been through a storm." He smiled faintly. "You could say that. Coffee?" He nodded, settling into the couch while she moved through the kitchen. He caught himself watching her, how she tucked her hair behind her ear, how her hands were steady even when she smiled. She wasn't like anyone he knew. There was no calculation in her eyes, no hunger for power, just life. "Here," she said, handing him the mug. "So tell me something, Mr. Elliot. What exactly do you do?" He hesitated, then said, "I run a business." "Oh, really?" she teased. "What kind of business needs 3 different phones and leaves bruises on your knuckles?" He looked up, caught off guard by her directness. Maya crossed her arms, eyes sharp but curious. "You don't talk about yourself much. Every time I ask, you dodge. You show up with expensive suits, a driver waiting downstairs, and that look like you've seen too much. So tell me, what are you running from?" The question landed like a blade between them. Elliot set his cup down slowly, eyes dark. "Everything." The word hung there, heavy, unexplainable. Maya didn't speak. She just watched him. Watched the way his walls trembled for the briefest second before he rebuilt them again. Before either could say another word, Lydia appeared, clutching a crumpled paper. "Mr. Elliot, I got picked for the recital tomorrow. You have to come." Elliot blinked. "Recital? Aha. I'm the sunflower in the garden song." She spread her arms wide, spinning once. "Mommy said you can come if you want." Maya froze mid-step. "I said he might be busy, honey." Lydia pouted. "But he won't be busy. He's my friend." Elliot smiled despite himself. "If your mom says it's all right, I'll be there." Maya hesitated, then sighed. "Fine. But only if you sit in the back and don't draw attention." He finished, amused. "Understood." The next day, the small daycare hall buzzed with proud parents and the squeal of children in costume. Elliot slipped in quietly, dressed simply in a dark coat and cap. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just a man trying to blend into a life that wasn't his. When the curtain opened, the chaos began. Little voices, forgotten lines, clumsy dances. And then Lydia stepped forward, her sunflower crown slightly tilted, eyes searching the crowd until she found him. She waved. And Elliot Cobb, man of silence, of blood, of cold control, actually waved back. The song began, bright and off-key, and something in his chest loosened. For a few minutes, he wasn't a man surrounded by enemies or haunted by sins. He was just a human being watching a child remind him what innocence looked like. When it ended, the parents applauded. Elliot stood with them, clapping harder than anyone. Lydia beamed, bowing proudly. For the first time in a long, long while, he felt clean. After the recital, Maya found him waiting near the exit. "You actually came," she said, half smiling, half stunned. "I said I would." She folded her arms, her tone soft but probing. "You don't strike me as someone who keeps promises easily." "I keep the important ones." They stepped outside together, the winter air cool against their faces. The parking lot was empty, quiet except for the hum of streetlights. Maya turned to him, her expression serious. "Elliot, I don't know who you are, but you scare me sometimes." Not because I think you'd hurt us, but because I think you could. And you wouldn't want to. That's what's confusing. He exhaled slowly. You're not wrong. Then tell me the truth. I can't or won't. Both. Their eyes locked. The tension between them felt like gravity, pulling closer, daring a confession neither was ready to give. For a heartbeat, they were inches apart. The world fell away. The noise, the questions, the danger. All that existed was breath and proximity, the almost of something real. Then his phone buzzed. Once. Twice. A tone he recognized instantly. Urgent. He stepped back, pulling it from his coat. His blood ran cold as the screen lit up. A message. No text. Just an image. Lydia, smiling in her sunflower costume. Her photo circled in red ink. Below it, 3 words burned like a brand. She's your weakness. Elliot's jaw clenched. His entire body went still. Elliot? Maya asked, her voice trembling. What is it? He locked the screen and slipped the phone away, forcing his tone calm. Nothing. Just business. But his eyes betrayed him. They'd gone dark. Darker than she'd ever seen. As he turned toward the shadows of the parking lot, something inside him shifted. The softness that had been growing in him, the warmth, the laughter, it all froze beneath the weight of a single truth. They'd found her. The war he'd been running from had finally come for what he loved. That night, the city felt sharper, colder. Elliot stood alone in his penthouse, staring out at the streets below. The lights looked like distant fires, flickering in the dark. He'd made the mistake of letting light in. Now it was being used against him. His phone buzzed again, Vince this time. Boss, I think we got a problem. I know, Elliot said quietly. Find out who sent it. And when we do, then I remind them what happens when they touch what's mine. His reflection in the window stared back. Half man, half monster. He didn't know which one would win. Somewhere across town, Maya tucked Lydia into bed, unaware that the world had just shifted. She thought of Elliot's haunted look and wondered what kind of darkness could carve scars like his. She didn't know that the answer was already on its way. Fast, dangerous, and closing in. Because love, in Elliot Cobb's world, was never safe. And for the first time in his life, he didn't care. So if you're still listening, if you've ever loved someone who made you question everything, you'll understand what comes next. Subscribe if you believe love can exist even in dangerous places. The night after the recital was a sleepless one. Elliot sat alone in his penthouse. Lights dimmed, the silence thick. The image on his phone, Lydia's face circled in red, played over and over in his mind until his hands trembled. He'd dealt with threats all his life. He'd made them too. But this was different. It wasn't about money, or power, or revenge. It was about her. The little girl who thought he was just Mr. Elliot with coffee. By morning, his men had swept the streets, turned over 2 safehouses, and interrogated 3 rival crews. Nothing. Whoever sent that photo was careful. Too careful. That made it worse. And so, before the sun even set that day, Elliot found himself outside Maya's apartment building, standing beside a playground fence as children's laughter floated through the air. Lydia spotted him first. Mr. Elliot, she squealed, waving a crayon-stained hand. He smiled faintly, just enough to be convincing, and crouched as she ran toward him, a streak of energy and joy. What are you doing here? She asked. Mommy says you work too much. I do, he said softly. But I wanted to see you both. Thought I'd check on my favorite sunflower. She giggled, the sound like sunlight through the noise in his mind. You came just in time. I made you something. She dashed back inside the building and returned moments later with a folded sheet of paper. It was a drawing, done in thick crayon lines. 3 figures stood beneath a bright sun. Mommy, Lydia, and Mr. Elliot. But this time, his face was smiling. See? She said proudly, pointing at it. You're happy now. I fixed it. He looked down at the paper for a long moment. The smile she'd drawn wasn't just a curve of crayon, It was a wish. You fixed it, huh? He murmured. Lydia nodded. You never smile for real. Mommy says it's 'cause grown-ups get tired. But I think it's 'cause you forgot how. He let out a soft, shaky laugh. You might be right. So why don't you? What? Smile for real, she said simply, tilting her head. Elliot stared at her. The kind of stare that held both admiration and sorrow. Because people like me forget how, he said quietly. Lydia frowned, then did something unexpected. She threw her little arms around his neck, hugging him tight. Then practice, she whispered. You can't forget if you try. It was such a simple thing. A child's command. But for a man who'd only known blood and loyalty bought with fear, it cracked something open inside him. When she finally let go, he felt the weight in his chest lighten just a little. Maya appeared at the doorway, watching them. She smiled softly, but there was a question in her eyes. I didn't expect to see you tonight, she said. Everything all right? Everything's fine, he lied. Just needed a break from work. Work, she repeated, half smiling. You say that like it's a battlefield. He looked away. Some days it feels that way. She gestured for him to come inside. Well, battlefield or not, you're here now. Tea. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure. The apartment was small but warm. Lydia's drawings lined the fridge. The faint scent of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. It was the kind of life Elliot had always seen from afar. Never touched. He sat at the small table while Maya moved around the kitchen, her movements light and practiced. Lydia's crazy about you, you know, she said. She talks about you like you're some kind of superhero. Elliot smiled faintly. Superheroes don't exist. Maybe not, she said, but good people do. He didn't respond. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was searching. Maya placed a cup of tea before him, then sat opposite, studying his face. Can I ask you something personal? He met her eyes. Depends. Why do you always look sad? The question caught him off guard. No one ever asked him things like that. Not without fear in their voice. But she wasn't afraid, she was curious. Genuine. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. Because when you spend your whole life building walls, you start to forget what it's like to live without them. She tilted her head. And what happens if you let them fall? Someone always gets hurt. There was quiet for a moment. Only the sound of Lydia humming faintly from her room. Then Maya reached across the table, resting her hand near his, close, but not quite touching. You don't strike me as someone who wants to hurt people, she said. He looked down at her hand, then back at her. I didn't used to. But I've done things I can't undo. She searched his face, seeing pain she couldn't name. You don't have to tell me what happened. I can already see it in your eyes. You've been alone a long time. He said nothing. But his silence was confirmation enough. Then Lydia's little voice broke through from the hall. Mommy. Mr. Elliot, come see. They followed her into the living room. She'd set up a small art show of her drawings on the couch, each one more colorful and chaotic than the last. This one's us at the cafe, she said, pointing proudly. And this one's Mr. Elliot saving a kitten. He raised an eyebrow. Saving a kitten. Yep. Mommy said you're brave, so I drew you being brave. Maya blushed. I didn't mean she should draw that. But Elliot chuckled, surprising them both. I like it. I've never been anyone's hero before. Lydia grinned, satisfied. Now you are. Later that night, after Lydia had gone to bed, Elliot lingered by the door, his coat in hand. Maya walked him out, their steps slow, reluctant. Thank you for coming by, she said. She's been so happy lately. I think you're good for her. He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. She's good for me, too. They stood there for a heartbeat too long. Neither spoke, but everything between them spoke for them. The unspoken pull, the fragile warmth, the danger of caring too much. Maya finally whispered, Elliot, whatever you're running from, I hope one day you stop. He didn't answer. He just met her gaze, eyes soft in the dim hallway light. "Good night, Maya." When the door closed, Maya leaned against it, her heart beating too fast for reasons she couldn't explain. Across the city, in a dim warehouse office, Vince sat across from a stranger, a rival broker known for trading secrets. "You sure you want to sell this?" the man asked, flicking a lighter open and shut. Vince hesitated. "I'm not selling. Just warning them off." Funny way to warn someone, handing me the nurse's name and address. Vince's jaw tightened. I'm just tired of watching him lose focus. He's not the same. This woman, she's making him weak. The man smirked. Or maybe she's making him human. Vince didn't reply. He just pushed the folder across the table and stood up. "Whatever happens next," he said coldly, he brought it on himself. When the man left, Vince sat back in the empty room, guilt gnawing at his chest. But it was too late now. The gears were in motion. The information he'd sold would travel fast, and by the time it reached the wrong hands, there would be no turning back. That same night, Elliot sat in his penthouse, the quiet pressing in again. He poured himself a drink, but the liquor didn't burn the way it used to. On the table lay Lydia's newest drawing, him smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he smiled for real. It was small, broken, but it was real. And for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the two people who made him remember he still had a soul. If you've ever met someone whose honesty cracked open your heart, you know what Elliot felt that night. You know how dangerous hope can be. Subscribe if you believe a child's honesty can change a heart of stone. The morning started like any other, until it didn't. Elliot came home to quiet that tasted wrong. The penthouse door was shut, the apartment dim. Lydia's drawing still lay on the side table where he'd left it, the crayon sun smudged where his thumb had brushed it in the night. He reached for it, thumbed the bright yellow circle, and the world folded. A small scrap of paper, taped to the inside of the front door, was the next thing he noticed. The handwriting was childish, deliberately so. A ribbon, the same pink that Lydia wore in her hair, lay beneath it, folded once like an offering. The note read, 3 words in jagged ink. "We have her." His breath left him in a sound somewhere between a hiss and a laugh. For half a second he pictured all the convenient retributions. Men found with their faces rearranged, cars burning in alleys, but that dry humor died on the floor when he saw the ribbon. It belonged to a child who called him Mr. Elliot, and drew suns on napkins. It belonged to Lydia. The penthouse felt suddenly too small, the glass windows like watching panes between life and a new, sharp reality. He crushed the paper in his fist until the edges bit his palm. Blood bloomed, warm and absurd, and he didn't notice. There was only one thing in his world anymore: the bright, vulnerable life of a little girl. Vince was in the doorway before Elliot had calmed himself enough to form orders. "Boss," he said without greeting, voice fast. "They took them. It. Vargas. Word is they want to make a point." Elliot didn't wait for the rest. The words bled into one another inside his skull. Vargas, point, until all of them meant the same: pain for people he could not allow to be hurt. He moved with a speed that came from years of carved instinct, past the living room, through the armory wall that opened with the right sequence of pressure and code, into the place where his men kept things they rarely had to use. "Get me everyone," he said. "Trace every phone. Pull every camera within a 5-mile radius. Find the receipt trail. Gas stations, tolls, plates. Whoever sees a movement, call it in. And find out who leaked her name." Vince's face tightened. "We'll find them." "You will," Elliot corrected. "And when you do, make sure they remember why no one burns what they don't own." The operation was old muscle, the kind that flexed without thought. Phones lit up, whispers turned to engines, and a city that often moved in slow, corrupt rhythms suddenly lurched into motion. His men flowed through alleys, into surveillance vans, into the recorded heart of 100 streets. He watched them go, a conductor of quiet violence, and felt something like sickness and unlike it, a fierce, protective clarity. He didn't sleep. He didn't let himself. He sat in the dark, the drawing of his smiling self folded beside his empty glass, and let memory file through. The places he'd taken, the promises he'd made to himself, never to be soft, never to let anyone close, and the single small voice who told him to practice smiling. Lydia's words rose up and would not be silenced. "You can still be good," she'd said. The phrase stuck like a light left burning in a house he'd forgotten. Maya woke to the stench of fear before she understood it. For a moment she thought a nightmare had dragged its way into morning. Lydia's absence, the open bedroom door, the small lamp still on. Footsteps came, heavier now, voices outside that did not sound like neighbors. Then the door jolted open, and masked figures moved with clinical efficiency. They were careful. Professional kidnappers who knew enough to be cruel but not enough to be careful. Maya fought, of course she fought. She screamed until her throat burned. She bit, she kicked. She wrapped herself around the child like a shield. But there were more of them. There was a plan, and there was a brief, terrifying efficiency she could not outmatch. They took them both. They moved fast, leaving behind a melted cup of tea on the counter and a child's drawing pinched under a chair leg. One of the captors folded the drawing, smoothed the crayon lines with a thumb, and tossed it into a pocket like the taunt it was intended to be. Somewhere on a table in a warehouse, a man would later unfold that paper and decide how much pain to demand in exchange for its return. In the vehicle they were silent. Lydia, alert despite the shock, clutched her mother's hand and hummed a tune she'd learned in daycare. Maya stroked the little head and whispered nonsense. Rhymes, the weather, promises, to keep terror from seizing them. She told herself to listen. Engines, turns, footsteps. She catalogued every sound like a nurse taking vitals, rational and clinical. Fear on its own refused to win against method. At some point Maya realized Lydia was shivering, not from cold but from the kind of tremor that comes when a child processes the idea of danger. "Mommy's here," she said, smoothing the girl's hair back. "We're going to be okay." The words were bomb and lie at once. She pressed the ribbon into Lydia's palm, the same pink that would later be found in Elliot's penthouse. "You can be brave, baby," Maya whispered. "You're the bravest person I know." Lydia squeezed her hand and hummed louder. Elliot City moved with the pulse of his command. TV wants and the quieter, darker currents of the underworld answered his whisper with action. He pulled favors, old debts, men who remembered when he'd been colder than anyone dared to be. He gave orders that sounded less like threats and more like promises. Bring them back. Bring them back by sundown. He called everyone who could help and anyone who shouldn't exist. Cameras were queried, license plate recognition went into overdrive, and men in nondescript vans rolled through industrial blocks where the city kept its worst secrets. The maps on his table filled with pins, red for sightings, black for dead ends, until a pattern emerged, a line leading toward the docks on the far side of town. The docks. The place that smelled of salt and oil and remembered betrayals. The place where he'd done the things he told himself he'd never do again. The place that now felt both courtroom and altar. He pulled up a photograph of Lydia's sunflower costume, the way it had folded in the photo where she'd snapped the pose for a parent. He pressed his thumb into it until the screen blurred and the picture snapped back to focus. For the first time in a long while, he was moving not to take, but to save. "Bring the truck," he told Vince. "Bring it to Pier 17. Quiet. You know what to do." Vince nodded. "We'll take the long way. We'll need backup on the East Quay and the 2 access roads." "No police," Elliot said before he could stop himself. "Not yet. If they hear sirens, they'll move them. If they move them, we lose them." Vince hesitated. "You sure, boss?" he asked, a question with more than one meaning. Elliot looked at Lydia's drawing again. The crayon sun looked ridiculous and holy in the dim light. He thought of Maya's steady hands and the way the child had hugged him like she could stitch seams back into a broken thing. "I'm sure," he said. He moved through the armory like a man returning to a craft he'd nearly abandoned. Guns were checked and rechecked. Maps were folded into his breast pocket. A leather jacket went on, worn at the collars from years of use. He buckled it as if preparing for a ceremony. He strapped the gun to his hip with fingers that did not tremble, but the knot in his throat was raw and human. As they drove toward the docks, The city's buildings slid by in a blur of neon and rain. Elliot sat in the back of a van with a dozen of his men and thought of Lydia's voice. Then practice. He had practiced violence his whole life. He would now practice salvation. They rolled into the industrial edge of the city like a tide. Cranes loomed like sleeping giants. Containers stacked in jagged teeth. The air smelled of salt and old iron. Men moved like shadows and the world narrowed to a single objective. When the vans peeled off near Pier 17, Elliot stepped out into the fog and the smell of diesel, and for a moment the past and present compressed. He tightened his jaw and let himself feel the rage and the fear in equal measure. This was where he had once been at his worst. Tonight, he would be at his most relentless. He checked his gun one last time, thumbed the safety off, and tucked Lydia's drawing into his inside pocket like a talisman. The paper was warm from his body. The crayon sun pressed flat by his heartbeat. "If they hurt them," Vince whispered. You know what happens," Elliot said. His voice was a promise and a warning braided into one. "We take back what's ours." As they stepped into the fog toward the lights of the pier, Elliot's mind repeated the small bright command he'd been given weeks ago. He would try to be good. He would try to be something other than the sum of his sins. He would bring them home. Or he would not come back at all. If you would do the same for the person who taught you how to care, if you'd cross the line into hell for that small bright life, then don't look away. Love asks for sacrifices, sometimes the worst ones. Subscribe if you'd fight for the ones who taught you love. The storm broke over the city like vengeance. Rain slashed sideways across the docks, swallowing the glow of the harbor lights and drumming against metal containers. Elliot stepped into it without flinching, black coat drenched, eyes burning against the wind. The docks were where it had all begun, where he'd built his empire on blood, silence, and the illusion of control. Now it was where he would tear it all apart. Behind him, a dozen of his men moved through the fog in silence, weapons ready. Ahead, the Vargas crew waited, shadows behind stacked cargo, the low growl of engines cutting through the rain. At the heart of it all stood Antonio Vargas himself, a smirk curling under the brim of his hat. Beside him, a dim warehouse door, half open, light leaking from within. And from inside that light, a sound broke through the rain. A small voice. Crying. "Lydia." Elliot's chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. He stepped forward, hands steady on his gun. "Vargas." His voice cut through the thunder. "You made your point. Let them go." The rival boss chuckled, cigar tip glowing faintly. Ah, the great Elliot Cobb. The legend himself crawling down to the dirt for a nurse and her kid. "Never thought I'd see the day." "Let them go," Elliot repeated, his tone flat, deadly. "You don't want what happens next." Vargas took a drag, then exhaled smoke into the rain. "I want everything that happens next." He snapped his fingers. The warehouse lights flared. Armed men stepped out, guns raised. Elliot's men fanned out in answer, the tension electric. 30 weapons waiting for a heartbeat to become war. Inside, Maya held Lydia close. Her wrists were bound, her lips split. She could hear them shouting outside. Elliot's voice like thunder, commanding, terrifying, familiar. She realized then, with a sinking in her chest, that this was who he really was. The calm, soft-spoken man who helped Lydia with her drawings was a monster who ruled by fear. But monsters don't come to save people. They come to end things. She held Lydia tighter, whispering, "Close your eyes, baby. No matter what happens, don't look." Outside, lightning flashed, and then all hell broke loose. Gunfire tore through the rain. Muzzle flashes stuttered across the docks. Men shouted, ducked, fell. The smell of gunpowder mixed with salt and diesel. Elliot moved through it all like a ghost, precise and silent, the storm's rhythm his own. Every bullet he fired was aimed to disable, not destroy. He shot to protect, not to punish. Even in the chaos, he felt it, Lydia's voice echoing inside him. Then practice. When the first explosion hit, a fuel drum igniting in a burst of flame, Elliot was already running. The warehouse door was ajar. Through the firelight, he saw her. Lydia. Tiny, terrified, clutching the ribbon that had once been her promise to him. "Mr. Elliot!" she screamed. The sound shattered him. He didn't hesitate. He dove through the flames. Heat seared his coat, smoke clawed his throat, but he kept moving. He tackled one of Vargas's men who'd been dragging Maya by the arm, sending him sprawling. The man's gun went off, sparks raining down, and Elliot grabbed it mid-fall, swinging it in one clean motion. He didn't even hear the bullet that tore through his side. He just kept going. Maya's sob cut through the chaos. "Elliot! Stop, please stop!" He turned, panting, blood soaking through his shirt. His gun lowered. His men were winning outside, the Vargas crew breaking, running for the dark. Elliot grabbed the rope binding Maya's wrists, cutting through it with a knife. She stared at him, disbelief and horror in her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because I couldn't lose you," he said, voice hoarse. Vargas stumbled out from behind the smoke, gun raised. "You think this ends with a fairy tale, Cobb?" Elliot turned, quick as lightning. But before he could fire, Vargas hesitated, just long enough for Elliot to see fear flicker behind his eyes. He could have killed him. Easily. Instead, he lowered the gun. "Walk away," Elliot said. "You hurt a child. That's your punishment, living with it." Vargas spat, eyes wild. "You're going soft." "Maybe," Elliot said. "But I'm still standing." He turned his back on the man, a mercy no one in the underworld had ever seen from him before. Then the gunshot came. A single crack of defiance. Elliot twisted too late. The bullet slammed into his shoulder, spinning him half around. He didn't fall. He didn't even curse. He just aimed again. One clean shot that sent Vargas's gun spinning into the water. Silence fell, broken only by the rain. Elliot dropped to one knee, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Lydia ran to him before Maya could stop her. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "You smiled, Mr. Elliot," she whispered through her tears. "You really smiled." He laughed, weakly. "Guess I practiced enough." Red and blue lights began to flash through the rain, the sound of police sirens growing louder, closer. Maya turned toward them, trembling. Her eyes moved from the gun in his hand to the bodies on the ground, to the blood soaking through his clothes. "You're a killer," she whispered, her voice cracking. "All this time, you're a killer." Elliot looked up at her, rain streaking down his face like penance. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "Because of you." The police closed in, their shouts echoing through the night. Elliot stood slowly, his body failing but his will unbroken. He looked at Maya, her face torn between anger, grief, and something she couldn't yet name, and then at Lydia, who held onto his hand like she could anchor him to the world. In that moment, surrounded by sirens and smoke, he understood something he never had before. You don't earn redemption by escaping your past. You earn it by facing it, and still choosing to love. He raised his hands as the officers swarmed. The lights swallowed him, and Lydia's cries carried across the rain. Maya reached for her daughter, holding her tight, heart shattered. And somewhere deep down, beneath the ruin of everything she knew, he hadn't saved them out of guilt or pride. He'd saved them because they were the only pure thing left in him. The storm began to fade. The dock steamed, black smoke curling into the night. Elliot's blood painted the ground where he'd stood, mingling with the rain. Proof that even monsters can bleed for love. And if you've ever believed that redemption isn't handed to us, but fought for, if you've ever hoped that broken people can still become something good, subscribe if you believe redemption is earned, not given. The sterile white light of the hospital room hummed faintly, the only sound besides the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Elliot lay in the bed, pale but alive, his shoulder and ribs bandaged tight. Rain still tapped faintly against the windows, as if the storm hadn't fully left the city, or him. He woke to silence and the faint scent of disinfectant. His vision adjusted slowly, and then he saw them. 2 uniformed officers posted near the door. A third man sat in the corner, his badge half hidden beneath his jacket, flipping through a notepad. "Mr. Cobb," the detective said without looking up. "Quite a mess down at the docks." Elliot didn't answer. He didn't need to. The detective kept talking, voice low, controlled. Witnesses saw you there. Gunfire, explosions. Half a dozen men in the water. Funny thing, though, no weapons were recovered. No video evidence. No surviving Vargas crew willing to talk. He finally looked up, meeting Elliot's eyes. Almost like the city wants to forget this happened. Elliot managed a faint, tired smile. Maybe it does. The detective studied him for a moment, then stood. You'll be released once the doctors clear you. Officially, there's nothing to charge you with. Unofficially. He leaned closer. Whatever you've been running, Cobb, it's burning out. Next time, you won't be this lucky. Elliot didn't reply. When the man left, the room went quiet again. He stared at the ceiling, the dull pain in his side pulsing with his heartbeat. He thought about the warehouse, about Lydia's arms around his neck, about the look on Maya's face when she whispered, "You're a killer." That word echoed louder than the gunfire ever had. Days later, he was released. 2 of his men met him outside, the only ones still loyal enough to stand in the open. "Everything's taken care of," Vince said, handing him a phone. "No cops, no trails. We made sure the Vargas name disappears from every street corner." Elliot nodded. And the docks? Burned. Like it never happened. He exhaled slowly, looking up at the city skyline, the empire he'd built from blood and shadow. For the first time, it looked hollow. "Good," he said quietly. "Start shutting everything down." Vince frowned. "You mean, what, just walk away?" Elliot's voice was steady. "Exactly that. You can't. You are this city, boss. You built it." Elliot looked at him, the same cold calm that once inspired fear now holding something softer, resignation. "Then it's time someone else unbuilt it." A week passed before Maya came. He was sitting in his penthouse. What was left of it? Most of the furniture was gone, the walls bare where paintings once hung. He'd been signing documents all morning. Transfers, dissolutions, settlements. The empire was dying by his own hand. When the elevator doors opened, he thought for a moment it was one of his men again. Then he heard her voice. "Lydia's downstairs with Vince," Maya said softly. "He said you wanted to see her." Elliot didn't move. "I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I would, either." They stood there in the half-empty room, the space between them thick with everything unsaid. "I wanted to hate you," Maya admitted. "After that night. After what I saw. But then I thought about Lydia. About how she talks about you." He looked at her then, eyes shadowed but clear. "What does she say?" "She says you're sad but you're trying." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "She's smarter than most people I know." Maya's gaze softened, but her voice trembled. "I don't know if I can love a man who's built from violence, Elliot. I don't know if I can live with what you've done." He nodded once, the acceptance quiet but absolute. "You shouldn't have to." She blinked, as if she hadn't expected that. "I'm ending it," he continued. "All of it. The money, the guns, the business. I'm giving it up." "Just like that." "No," he said, his voice rough. "Not just like that. But I'll do it anyway." Later that afternoon, Lydia came bounding into the room, clutching something in her small hands. "Mr. Elliot. Mommy said I could come up if I promise not to jump on the chairs." Elliot smiled faintly. "That's a good rule." She ran to him and climbed onto his lap, holding out a folded piece of paper. "I made you another drawing. See?" It was simpler this time. Just 3 figures holding hands under a blue sky. The man in the middle had no scars, no shadows. Just a bright, uneven smile. He swallowed hard. "It's perfect." Lydia tilted her head. "Mommy cries sometimes. She says she misses you but doesn't know why." Elliot's throat tightened. "Tell her she shouldn't miss me." "I did," Lydia said honestly. "She said she can't help it." He laughed softly, a sound that broke on the edges. "Then tell her I can't help it either." She grinned, satisfied, and hopped down to explore the empty room. He watched her, the tiny burst of color she brought to the gray space, and something inside him shifted again, an ache giving way to peace. That night, he made it official. Warehouse after warehouse went dark. Ledgers burned. Trucks rolled out one last time, empty this time. Every piece of the empire was stripped, dismantled, handed off to those who could use it for something cleaner. He sold off the properties, wired the proceeds to hospitals, orphanages, shelters. Money that had once bought bullets now bought beds, medicine, food. The city didn't know what to make of it. The underworld called it madness. Elliot called it balance. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. One night he simply left, the same way he had entered the world years ago, alone, unseen. The man who once ruled the night vanished into the sunrise, leaving behind nothing but rumors and the faint scent of smoke. Weeks later, in a small cafe at the edge of the city, Maya sat by the window with Lydia. The little girl was coloring while her mother stared at the morning paper. The headline at the bottom of the page read, "Former mob empire collapses. Millions donated to charity." Maya traced the words with her thumb, her eyes softening. "Mommy," Lydia said, "do you think Mr. Elliot is happy now?" Maya smiled faintly. "I think he's finally learning how to be." Lydia nodded, coloring harder. "Then I'm glad." Somewhere far away, in a quiet house by the sea, Elliot Cobb stood barefoot in the sand. The horizon glowed gold and blue, the water calm. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper, a child's drawing of 3 people under a yellow sun. He looked at it for a long time, then smiled, small but real. "Guess I finally learned," he murmured. He let the paper go. The wind caught it, lifted it, carried it away over the water. And for the first time, Elliot Cobb, the man who once ruled the city by fear, felt free. If you've ever had to destroy something you built to become who you're meant to be, if you've ever learned that strength isn't in holding on but in letting go, subscribe if you believe real strength is letting go. The cafe hadn't changed much. Same amber lights, same hum of quiet music, same soft clinking of coffee cups. But to Elliot Cobb, it looked completely different now. Maybe because he was different. It had been a year since the night the city burned behind him. A year since he walked away from the empire that once defined him. Now he ran something new. Cobb Security and Protection, a small firm that guarded businesses instead of extorting them, kept people safe instead of afraid. He was no longer the man people whispered about in fear. He was just Elliot. The barista greeted him with a familiar smile as he sat at his usual corner table, the same one where it all began. "Morning, Mr. Cobb," she said. "Your usual." He nodded. "Black. No sugar." The same order. But it tasted different now, less bitter, more alive. Through the cafe window, sunlight spilled across the polished tables, painting the room in gold. For the first time in his life, Elliot realized peace didn't roar, it whispered. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, leaned back, and waited. He wasn't waiting for a business deal this time, or a rival, or even a threat. He was waiting for them. The bell above the door jingled, light and familiar. A small voice pierced the air, bright as laughter. "Mr. Elliot." Lydia barreled across the room in her school uniform, her backpack bouncing, her hair tied in 2 messy puffs. She threw her arms around him without hesitation. He caught her mid-run, laughing as he spun her once before setting her down. "You've grown again," he said, pretending to frown. "What are they feeding you?" "Pancakes," she said proudly. "Mommy still burns them, though." He laughed, full and real, a sound that drew glances from the other tables, but none of the old fear. "Mommy's parking the car," Lydia added seriously, straightening her backpack straps. "She said to tell you she's sorry she's late." The barista giggled from behind the counter, recognizing the déjà vu. "Guess history repeats itself, huh?" Elliot smiled, warmth spreading through him. "Yeah," he said softly. "Some stories are worth repeating." Moments later, the door opened again, and Maya walked in. She wasn't the woman he'd met a year ago, the one trembling between fear and hope. She looked radiant now, grounded, whole. Her hair was looser, her smile easier. She wore a nurse's badge pinned to her uniform, and the way she looked at him carried no hesitation, no questions. Only quiet certainty. "Sorry we're late," she said, cheeks flushed from the wind. "Traffic's a nightmare." Elliot rose to meet her, the old instinct to stand when she entered never leaving him. "You're right on time." Lydia tugged her mom's sleeve. "See, Mommy. He doesn't even mind waiting." Maya laughed. "I think he's getting better at it." They all sat down together, same corner table, same candle flickering in its glass holder. The circle was complete, but everything inside it had changed. As they ate, the conversation flowed like something timeless. Lydia's school stories, Maya's new night shift at the hospital, Elliot's work with his company. He'd started small, personal bodyguards, security contracts for non-profits, safe-house partnerships with the same shelters he'd once ignored. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't powerful. But it was good. And that was enough. At one point, Lydia dropped her crayon mid-doodle and looked up at him, serious as ever. "Mr. Elliot?" "Yeah, sunshine. Do you still smile for real now?" Elliot glanced at Maya, who was already smiling at him. Then he turned back to the little girl who had once walked into his life and unknowingly saved him from himself. "Every day," he said. "Because of you." Lydia grinned wide, proud. "I told you it's easy if you practice." He chuckled. "You were right, kid. You saved me first." When their food came, the barista brought an extra cup, something she'd started doing months ago. A quiet ritual between them. 3 mugs, clinking softly in the cafe's glow. "To second chances," Elliot said, raising his cup. Maya met his gaze, eyes glistening. "To new beginnings." Lydia, caught between them, giggled. "To pancakes that don't burn." Their laughter carried through the cafe, warm and unguarded. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Cars rushing by, people chasing their next thing, unaware that in one small corner of it all, the man once feared by everyone had found what power never gave him. Peace. Love. Family. As they prepared to leave, Maya leaned in and kissed his cheek. "You look happy," she whispered. "I am," he said simply. Lydia tugged his sleeve. "Mr. Elliot, can we come back next week?" He smiled. "Every week if you'd like." And as the two of them walked ahead toward the door, Maya's hand in her daughter's, Elliot paused for just a moment. He looked around the cafe, the faint light flickering across his table, and remembered the man who once sat there with nothing but a cup of untouched coffee and a heart full of ghosts. He wasn't that man anymore. He had learned how to wait. He had learned how to love. He had learned how to smile. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and roasted coffee. The city hummed as it always did. Chaotic, alive, indifferent. But somewhere in its rhythm, there was a different kind of heartbeat now, one that belonged to a man reborn, to a nurse who believed in him, and to a little girl whose innocence lit the darkest soul. Elliot stepped into the light, hands in his pockets, eyes soft as dawn. And for the first time, the city didn't feel like something he needed to conquer. It felt like home. If you believe love can rewrite any story, if you've ever seen someone change because one small heart refused to give up on them, subscribe if you believe love can rewrite any story.